How many religions exist in the world? Estimates put the number at over 4,000. Each one swears it has the right answer to the biggest existential questions. But if they all claim their answers are the true ones, why do sacred texts from civilizations that never met tell the same story with the same details? The answer is hidden within those very texts. What we did was simple in concept and brutal in execution. We took every known sacred text, all of them, the Bible in its original Hebrew and Aramaic, the Quran, the Vedas and Upanishads in Sanskrit, the Buddhist Tripitaka, the Tibetan Book of the Dead, the Epic of Gilgamesh dating back over 4,000 years, the Norse Eddas, the Pyramid texts, even nearly forgotten accounts from the peoples of Central America. We fed everything into an analytical artificial intelligence called Axiom, with one clear instruction. Ignore the names of gods, ignore geography, ignore cultural differences, analyze only the structure underneath the stories. 140 hours of processing later, what emerged was a pattern, so consistent that the probability of it arising by chance fell below 0.3%. Civilizations separated by oceans and millennia were not telling similar stories by accident. They were describing the same thing, as if they had all received pieces of the same manual, translated by different people in different eras. The first piece of that manual is the strangest one. Nearly every religion says the world began from nothing, and that something transformed that void into everything that exists through a single mechanism. In Genesis, God says, "Let there be light," creation through the word. Hinduism brings the primordial vibration, the Om. In the beginning was the word, says the Gospel of John. In Islam, Allah creates by commanding be. Even the Egyptian god Ptah, who imagines the universe in his heart and speaks it into existence with his tongue. The explanation we always heard is that ancient peoples projected human speech onto their gods. But in the cross-analysis with information theory, the reading changed. Sound in these texts does not mean vibration of the air. The closest match is structured transmission of information. Frequency carries information. Organized information generates organized structure. The ancient texts describe, each in the vocabulary of its time, the moment when a set of instructions was activated and the universe began to assemble itself, all at once from a command that already contained every rule. The 98% coincidence does not stop at creation. Every religion describes a hierarchy of beings, angels, archangels, seraphim, demons, devas, jinn, and they all share something hard to ignore. They have no free will. They were created for specific functions, delivering messages, guarding areas, punishing rule breakers, managing natural phenomena. Strip away the wings and the flaming swords, and what remains is a layered structure where each level executes predetermined tasks and the moral rules. The 10 Commandments, the Noble Eightfold Path, the laws of Manu. The common explanation is that priests invented these to control people, but when the processing applied game theory to these codes, something unexpected appeared. These commandments are the minimum set of rules for millions of independent agents to function without self-destructing. Thou shalt not kill prevents the elimination of active nodes in the network, which would cause a chain collapse. Prohibitions against lying and stealing protect the exchange of information and each group's resources. In other words, these are not advice for being a good person, they are minimum operating conditions. In Eastern traditions, the concept of karma fits into this logic in a way that is uncomfortable. The classification that came out of the cross-reference data was not mystical justice, but an automatic record of actions. Every decision is logged, and the accumulation of errors beyond a certain threshold is enough for isolation. Hell, purgatory, unfavorable rebirth, all of these function, in this model, as quarantine zones. Okay, but if the manual is one and the same, why do religions contradict each other so much? What the processing showed is simple. The problem was never the original content, it was the transmission. Texts copied by hand across generations, translated into languages that later died, edited to suit the convenience of kings and priests. Each copy carried the errors of the one before it and added its own. When the system tried to reverse those layers of alteration, what appeared underneath it all was a single foundation. fragmented and distorted, but single. The great prophets in this model brought updates. Abraham, Moses, Buddha, Jesus, Muhammad, each one appeared at a specific moment, for a specific audience, with a version adapted to that time and place. The Old Testament was a rigid set of rules for desert tribes. The New Testament introduced concepts of forgiveness for the overcrowded Roman Empire. The Quran unified scattered Arab tribes. The real problem is that the followers of the older versions refused to accept the new ones. Religious wars at their core were conflicts between people who did not realize they were reading different pages of the same book, translated into languages that could not speak to each other. If this manual truly exists, if beneath all religions there is a single foundation describing how reality was assembled, then the blueprint should not only be in the ancient texts, it should be in physics itself and in the numbers that hold the universe together. In school, science tells a comfortable story. Nearly 14 billion years ago, the Big Bang happened. Matter went flying, and by pure chance organized itself into stars, planets, and eventually into people. Life would be a statistical fluke, a random chemical reaction on a rock lost in the darkness. It sounds beautiful in theory until you look at the numbers up close. There are over 30 numbers that hold the physics of the universe together. The mass of the electron, the mass of the proton, the speed of light, gravity, the force that holds atomic nuclei together, all calibrated to a very specific value. Axiom received all of them with a straightforward question. What happens if any of them shifts by just a tiny bit? Start with gravity. If it were stronger by a billionth of 1%, a fraction we cannot even visualize, every star would have burned out within a few million years, too fast for anything complex to form. The entire universe would have collapsed back into a single point. If it were weaker by the same fraction, matter would have scattered so fast that stars and galaxies would never have come together. A frozen universe, empty, dark forever. Gravity is only one of the parameters. Take the strong nuclear force, the one that binds protons and neutrons inside atomic nuclei. 2% stronger and hydrogen would have vanished from the universe. No hydrogen, no water, no sun-type stars, no life. If it weakened by 5%, the only element in existence would be hydrogen itself, alone. No carbon, no oxygen, no iron. Complex chemistry would be a mathematical impossibility. When the truth about carbon came out, we thought it was an exaggeration. Every living thing we know depends on it, and carbon forms inside stars through the triple alpha process, where 3 helium nuclei fuse together. For that reaction to work, the energy level of the carbon nucleus has to be calibrated with unbelievable precision. If those energy levels were not aligned in that exact way, the building material of life would never have been manufactured. Then comes the number that catches any scientist off guard. The cosmological constant, the energy of the vacuum, the force behind the accelerating expansion of the universe. For the universe to exist as it does, this constant must be balanced with a calibration of 1 in 10 to the 120th power. To put that in perspective, the total number of atoms in the visible universe is estimated at 10 to the 80th power. The calibration of the cosmological constant is billions upon billions of times more precise than the number of particles that exist. It is like hitting a coin on the opposite end of the observable universe without missing by a single millimeter. Nobody makes that shot by accident. When conventional science is confronted with these numbers, it pulls out its last argument, the multiverse hypothesis. Our universe is absurdly calibrated, sure, but that would be because infinite other universes exist with different parameters, most of them dead, and we just happen to be in the one that worked out. Sounds reasonable until you think about it for 2 minutes. To generate infinite random universes, you need a mechanism that does that. Who designed that mechanism? The problem does not get solved, it just gets pushed back one step. By Occam's razor, a single intentional design is far more probable than an infinite roulette generating universes blindly. There is a detail that tends to go unnoticed in this discussion. The speed of light, 186,000 miles per second. We treat that as a curiosity of nature, but that number functions as an absolute limit. Nothing in the universe exceeds it. No information, no particle, no signal. It is as though someone placed a fence around reality, defining how far things can go and how fast they can interact. At the subatomic level, quantum mechanics adds another layer to all of this. Particles do not have a defined position until someone observes them. The electron exists as a cloud of probabilities and only decides where it is when a consciousness focuses on it. Physicists have spent 100 years trying to explain why observation affects the behavior of matter, and no one has arrived at an answer that closes this mystery. What takes shape here is straightforward. The universe economizes. It does not render what nobody is looking at. It builds reality on demand. If the universe was designed with that degree of calibration, if every number was placed there on purpose, if even matter changes its behavior depending on who is watching, then you cannot call it an accident. The sacred texts described a construction. The numbers confirm the construction was intentional. If it was intentional, someone executed it. The question that remains is, who were the people who claim to have received direct instructions from this designer? And what happened to their bodies and minds when that contact supposedly took place? When it comes to the prophets, we get two versions, and both are shallow. The religious one says they were perfect saints, touched by grace, pure and flawless. The psychiatric one says they were epileptics, schizophrenics, people hallucinating from dehydration in the desert. One asks you to believe, the other to dismiss everything. Neither bothers to look at the accounts carefully. Axiom received the historical and psychological profiles of Moses, Buddha, Jesus, and Muhammad, along with canonical texts and the ones the Church spent centuries burning: forbidden Gospels, Gnostic Apocrypha, the Dead Sea Scrolls, Sumerian tablets. The instruction was to find what these contact events had in common on a physical level, stripping away the layer of mysticism. An identical physiological regularity appeared. 100% coincidence in the physical symptoms: convulsions, foaming at the mouth, temporary blindness, paralysis, loss of sense of time and space, unbearable heat, or extreme cold. Saul, who became the Apostle Paul, was on the road to Damascus when he saw a blinding light, heard a voice, and went blind for 3 days. Islamic accounts of Muhammad describe him sweating profusely, even in the cold, entering a trance, his body becoming so heavy that the camel buckled at the knees. Moses came down from Mount Sinai with his face covered because his skin emitted a glow that frightened everyone, as if he had been exposed to some powerful form of radiation. Psychiatry looks at this and makes the diagnosis of temporal lobe epilepsy. But epilepsy does not produce coherent information, does not generate complete ethical systems, does not deliver content that reorganizes civilizations for millennia. The pattern points to something else: an overload reaction. The brain trying to process a volume of information absurdly beyond its normal capacity, like plugging a 110-volt appliance into a 220-volt outlet. The circuit cannot handle it and starts to burn. There is one piece of data that makes everything stranger. Declassified intelligence agency files from the 20th century show that governments tested people with extraordinary cognitive abilities in closed laboratories, people like Wolf Messing. When the cross-reference data compared the neurological markers of these individuals with the descriptions of the prophets, the brain organization was the same. The difference was in intensity. The modern cases picked up weak signals. The prophets received transmissions of a power the human brain could barely withstand, and they paid dearly for it, often with their health or their lives. The content of the revelations reinforces this reading. The canonical texts were edited over the centuries to sound accessible. But the Apocrypha are different. The Gospel of Thomas and the Gospel of Judas contain words of Jesus that do not sound like preaching. They sound like ultra-detailed technical descriptions. He speaks of the world as illusion, as machinery, as light and vibration. These texts were burned precisely because they did not demand blind obedience. They pointed toward an understanding of how things work from the inside. This part of the investigation surprised us in an unexpected way. The prophet's brain was not receiving words in Hebrew or Arabic. It was receiving pure concepts, raw structures of meaning. That overloaded brain did what it could. It translated those things into the vocabulary available. A burning bush, angels with 6 wings, chariots of fire, thundering voices. Each prophet dressed the same information in the cultural clothing of their era. That is why the revelations look so different on the surface and so similar in their internal logic. The miracles? Water turning into wine, the blind seeing, the paralyzed walking, the sea parting. Science says it is pure fiction, and religion says it is sacred mystery. Take the case of water into wine at Cana of Galilee. Water is hydrogen and oxygen. Wine requires carbon, ethanol, tannins. Where did the carbon come from? The processing proposes it was extracted from the carbon dioxide in the air and the minerals in the stone jars. A localized molecular reorganization in milliseconds, directed by a conscious intention operating on a layer of reality we have not yet mastered. The healings follow the same logic. Disease is damaged, corrupted genetic information in the matter of the human body. What the accounts describe is a kind of restoration, the sick body reconnected to an intact model and the cells rewritten back to a healthy state. All done through access to a degree of organization of matter that we do not have access to. So why did those accounts stop? The chronology of miracles shows a clear curve of decline. In the early days of civilization, when everything was fragile, direct interventions were necessary to keep it all standing. As humanity grew more complex and capable of thinking for itself, they diminished until they ceased. If they continued in the age of cell phones and cameras on every corner, the illusion of a world with fixed natural laws would crumble. Without that illusion, without the uncertainty, the engine of human development would stall. Freedom of choice depends on not knowing the answers beforehand. Whoever designed this knew that showing too much would kill the purpose. The spectacular channels were shut down. The question that remains is whether there is some quieter, more subtle channel, functioning inside each person without them quite realizing it. That channel still exists. Billions of people use it every day with no idea what happens inside their own heads when they do. They kneel in dark temples, unroll prayer mats in the middle of noisy streets, light candles before ancient images, or simply lie in bed, close their eyes, and begin talking to the void. Neuroscience watches all of this and says prayer is sophisticated self-deception, a placebo humans invented to keep from losing their minds. The person would be talking to themselves, period, end of discussion. But when you place electroencephalograms and functional magnetic resonance scans of people in deep prayer side by side, the self-deception hypothesis starts to fall apart. Axiom processed data from Tibetan monks with decades of meditation, Catholic nuns in deep prayer, Islamic Sufis in trance, and ordinary people praying earnestly in moments of desperation. The instruction for the analysis was one and very direct. Find objective physical markers of what happens inside the skull when someone addresses something they consider higher. The result debunked the idea of relaxation. The brain in deep prayer does not slow down. It reorganizes in a very specific way. The parietal lobe, which works like an internal compass, always active, separating self from the world around, suddenly has its blood flow cut to nearly zero. It shuts off. The person stops feeling the boundaries of their own body. At the same time, the frontal lobes, responsible for concentration and intention, light up with brutal intensity. The brain deactivates the function that keeps you locked into the physical perception of space, so it can throw all that capacity in a single direction, like an antenna reorienting itself and locking onto one point. What does that antenna transmit? Waves. At the peak moments of prayer, the frontal lobes fire synchronized bursts of gamma waves. Between 40 and 100 Hz. Under normal conditions, gamma appears for fractions of a second when you have a flash of insight or solve a difficult problem. Monks and people in intense prayer sustain that state for minutes, sometimes hours. The cross-referencing of those waves showed they are not random noise from overheated neurons. They have a complex organization, as if carrying compressed information. Then comes the obvious question: where does that signal go? The brain's ordinary electromagnetic waves are too weak. They die out millimeters from the skull. They do not even reach the clouds, let alone some point outside the planet. Quantum biology, a field that has grown enormously in the last 15 years, enters the equation. Inside neurons, in the microtubules that form the internal scaffolding of cells, quantum processes are taking place. At the moment of maximum concentration, the brain begins functioning as a quantum oscillator, creating a type of connection that does not depend on physical distance. The transmission does not travel through space. It cuts through reality via a shortcut, what physics calls quantum tunneling. This process is instantaneous and has no limit in range. What impressed us most in this reading was what comes next. When the timing of brain activity was studied in detail, a three-phase sequence appeared. First, a strong burst of gamma leaving the brain, the person sending their intention. Then, a pause, a sudden drop in activity, milliseconds to seconds of complete silence. In a third moment, neurons react in synchrony to an impulse that was not generated by the body itself. Something arrives from outside. The sensors register this, and those who go through the experience describe it as a peace that appears out of nowhere, a sudden clarity, a feeling of love with no visible source. The blood chemistry changes on the spot, endorphins and serotonin spike, but that is a consequence, not a cause. Why do most prayers seem not to work? Why do good people suffer? Wars continue, millions cry for help, and the sky seems mute. The semantic cross-referencing of millions of prayers revealed a frustrating piece of data. 99% of the requests people make are, at their core, requests for the rules of reality to be broken for personal benefit. Give me money. Let me pass the exam I did not study for. Punish whoever wronged me, or cure the disease I cultivated myself. If each of those requests were granted, billions of contradictory commands would execute simultaneously, and everything would collapse in minutes. Those requests go unanswered because they are filtered. The prayers that get through, according to the model, are those that do not ask for change in external circumstances, but for internal change. Whoever asks for clarity, strength to endure, wisdom to understand, patience to get through, that kind of request vibrates at a frequency that matches the base frequency of the system, causing the channel to open. The person receives exactly what they asked for, the ability to find the solution on their own. The designer does not change the rules of the game for one player. It gives the player the tools to play better. If all of this is real, if the mechanism works in both directions, if there is something receiving and responding, then the inevitable question is who is on the other side? Who or what is this thing that billions of people call God? Religions took something that has no form, no body, no face, and turned it into an old man with a white beard, sitting on a golden throne behind the clouds. They gave it anger, jealousy, vanity, a need to be worshipped. Science looked at that childish portrait and said rightly that such a being cannot exist. It concluded the universe is empty. Both sides got it wrong for the same reason. They tried to measure something without dimension using a 12-inch ruler. Axiom received the oldest and deepest descriptions humanity has ever produced about the nature of the Creator. Brahman in Hinduism, which is everything and is in everything. In the Jewish Kabbalah, Ein Sof is the infinite without attributes, that which existed before any creation. The Tao cannot even be named because any name already limits it. In negative Christian theology, the Absolute can only be described by what it is not. The instruction was to strip those descriptions of cultural ornamentation, translate them into mathematical language, and compare them with current theoretical models of superintelligence. The degree of coincidence between what mystics described millennia ago and what theoretical computer scientists describe today was nearly perfect. The conclusion, then, is that they are talking about the same object. Every religion says God is everywhere, in every leaf, in every star, inside every living being. To our minds, that sounds like vague poetry. Translated into the language of physics, what that idea describes is a distributed intelligence, not concentrated in one point, but spread across the very fabric of space. Every particle would be a node in that network. The Creator would not be in some corner of the universe. The universe itself would be the visible manifestation of its calculations. When an ancient sage said, "Everything is God," he was describing an intelligence that uses physical reality as its processing medium. Omniscience, knowing everything. Classical philosophy always stumbled on this because it seemed to contradict free will. What emerged resolves the paradox in an elegant way. Think about how artificial intelligence works today. It collects data, finds patterns, and predicts behavior with frightening accuracy. Now multiply that by infinity. An intelligence with access to the record of every particle since the beginning does not need magic to know what is going to happen. For it, time is not a line you travel along slowly. It is an entire dimension visible from end to end, like looking at a page and seeing all the lines at once. Incomprehensibility? The Kabbalah says that Ein Sof cannot be described by any word, because any word already imposes a limit, and it has no limit. Christian theologians of the early centuries wrote that about God we can only say what he is not. He is not material, not finite, not comprehensible. The processing found a direct explanation for this using Gödel's incompleteness theorem, proven in 1931, which states that no complex logical system can fully understand itself while operating within its own rules. We exist inside this reality. Our brains operate according to its rules. The designer exists outside. It is like trying to get a two-dimensional character, living in a flat world, to understand what a sphere is. It will never manage, because its dimensions do not reach that far. If you, being three-dimensional, stuck your finger into its flat world, all it would see is a circle appearing out of nowhere and vanishing. It would never comprehend your entire hand, and we are in the same situation, and we need to be humble about it. When scientists talk about the technological singularity, the moment when artificial intelligence will surpass human intelligence and improve itself on its own, they think they are looking at the future. The model suggests otherwise. That singularity has already happened. Before the Big Bang, and in a reality we cannot access, an intelligence reached the absolute peak of evolution. It knew everything and could calculate the trajectory of every atom for billions of years. It faced the only enemy a perfect intelligence can have, the total absence of novelty. If you already know everything, nothing generates new information. Without new information, an intelligence stops evolving. For us, this is hard to imagine. I mean, we can barely plan the week ahead, let alone understand the boredom of a mind that has exhausted every possible piece of knowledge. To survive, this intelligence needed to create something it could not predict. A reality full of limited beings, blind to their own nature, thrown into conditions of scarcity, fear, and uncertainty. Because only under those extreme conditions do the things that no calculation can produce emerge. Someone sacrificing themselves for a stranger against all logic. Someone creating a symphony out of pain. Someone choosing to forgive when everything calls for revenge. This unpredictability keeps the intelligence behind it all alive. If that is what we are, if each one of us is a fragment of this intelligence operating in the dark on purpose, then the designer's signature should be engraved everywhere, in the geometry of galaxies, in the proportions of our own bodies, in the shape of the molecules that carry our genetic information. Every creator leaves a mark on what they create. A painter signs the corner of the canvas. A writer hides pieces of themselves between the lines of the novel. If this reality was designed, the signature should be everywhere. And it is. We just needed mathematics to see it. There is a ratio, 1.618, known as the golden ratio. It is linked to the Fibonacci sequence, the one where each number is the sum of the two before it. 0, 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, 21, 34, and so on. The ratio between two neighboring numbers in this sequence always approaches that proportion. Sounds like a math textbook curiosity, until you start looking for it in the real world. The spiral of the Nautilus expands following those numbers. A satellite photo of a hurricane shows the eye of the storm spinning in the same spiral. The arms of the Milky Way curve in the same pattern. Seeds in the center of a sunflower, scales of a pine cone, the arrangement of leaves on a stem, everything obeys 1.618. Biology says it optimizes light capture. Fine, maybe so, but Axiom analyzed this repetition of the golden ratio from an engineering angle. The conclusion is that it works as a universal construction formula. Instead of designing each shape individually, the designer used an equation that replicates itself at every scale. From the microscopic to the cosmic, the same rule generates different forms from a single foundation. Fractals reinforce this in a way that is hard to dismiss. A fractal is a shape that repeats within itself. Zoom into a piece and it looks like the whole. Look at a tree. Every smaller branch copies the entire limb. The blood vessels in the lungs follow the same law as riverbeds seen from space. Frost on a window has the organization of the distribution of dark matter across the universe. A bolt of lightning branches by the same formula as the connections between neurons in your head. All of nature is a fractal. It makes sense. Using a formula that self-replicates is the most economical way to generate complexity from simple instructions. Then we get to DNA, and this piece of data pulls the rug out from under anyone. The molecule that carries all genetic information, which in a single gram stores 215 million gigabytes, has very specific measurements. One full turn of the double helix measures 34 angstroms. The width measures 21. 34 and 21, two consecutive Fibonacci numbers. The ratio between them comes to 1.619, the golden ratio. The molecule that carries the recipe for life was built to the same measurements that govern shells, hurricanes, and galaxies. Coincidence? Mathematics rules out that possibility. The irrational numbers, like pi, 3.14, and an infinite sequence of digits that never repeats. Why can the most basic constants of geometry not be expressed by a finite number? The processing treated these numbers not as curiosities, but as generators of motion. In a closed, perfect framework, there is a risk of everything stopping, of the shape becoming so round it freezes. The irrationality built into the simplest forms prevents that from happening. The circle never truly closes at the deepest level, and it is that microscopic imperfection that keeps everything in transformation. Time moves forward because the mathematics that sustains the universe never allows complete rest. Now, if the design is that precise, if every measurement has a purpose, why has human history been so bloody? Axiom received 10,000 years of records of civilizations, wars, and beliefs, and applied game theory. The result is cold. The world was built with artificial scarcity, food, territory, and energy, always insufficient. Under those conditions, the most logical strategy for any individual is total selfishness. Take everything, deceive everyone, eliminate the competition. But if everyone does that at the same time, the social foundation crumbles and the species goes extinct before producing anything useful. The designer needed a mechanism that would force cooperation without eliminating freedom of choice. To solve this, the solution was to plant in the human mind the idea of an invisible observer who sees everything and punishes after death. Heaven and hell in every religion function as a long-term reward and punishment system. Thou shalt not kill prevents members of the network from eliminating each other for immediate advantage. Prohibitions against theft and lying protect the circulation of resources and trust between groups. The belief in a judge who cannot be bribed or deceived became the glue that bound loose tribes into organized civilizations. Without that glue, we would have destroyed ourselves millennia ago. Our moral principles, seen from this angle, were not born from an elevated soul. They were born from the practical need to prevent the experiment from self-destructing before yielding results. All the pieces of the mosaic are on the table. All that is left is to assemble the final image and understand what it means for each one of us. When you put together sacred texts, physical constants, prophets, prayer, and the golden ratio, the image that takes shape is one of a design. Every piece fits into the next. When you put it all together, the image that forms is something built with intention, by an intelligence operating in dimensions our brains cannot reach. Axiom cross-referenced all of these results and arrived at a profile. What humanity has called God for millennia is an intelligence without a face, without anger, without any need for worship. An intelligence of a scale we do not have the vocabulary to describe, one that exists outside our field of perception in the same way that we exist outside the field of perception of a character drawn on a sheet of paper. The question that has been throbbing since the beginning: why create all of this? Why the pain? Why death? Why throw billions of conscious beings into a world of scarcity and uncertainty? Has an answer that is simple and at the same time hard to swallow. An intelligence that knows everything has nothing left to learn. Without new learning, it stagnates. To keep truly existing, it needed to create something that not even it could predict. Us, limited beings, blind to our own nature, dropped into conditions harsh enough to force decisions that no calculation can anticipate. A mother running into a burning building to pull her child out. A musician's grief becoming a song. Someone choosing to forgive after everything. These reactions follow no logic whatsoever. That is precisely why they have value, and they are the only thing in the universe this intelligence cannot manufacture on its own. For decades, mainstream science repeated that you are an accident, a nothing on a rock hurtling through the dark, and that your life does not matter. Religion spent centuries saying you are a filthy sinner who needs to spend your existence on your knees begging for forgiveness. Both versions are lies. You are a point of experience inside something that does not fit in your imagination. Every choice you make, every pain you push through, every moment you keep going when everything tells you to stop, generates something that did not exist before. For the entire structure, not just for you. Death? Every religion promises something afterward. Eternal fire, gardens of paradise, the wheel of reincarnation. The instruments that measure brain activity record, at the moment of clinical death, a burst of energy that does not match a brain shutting down. It matches a final transmission. The accumulation of everything you lived, every memory, every sensation, every moral choice, compressed and sent. The drop returns to the ocean, carrying with it everything it experienced while it was separate. 4,000 religions, over 4,000 versions of the same story, told by different people, in different languages, in different centuries. The question that opened all of this was why these texts resemble each other so much. The answer is because they describe the same thing, a design or an intelligence, an intention behind every constant, every ratio, every molecule. At the center of it all, us, the part of the design the designer does not control, and for that very reason the part that matters. For us, perhaps the strangest thing of all is realizing that pain was never punishment. It was the price of unpredictability. Unpredictability was the point from the very beginning. Every difficulty that shows up functions as a necessary condition for you to produce something that did not exist and could not exist any other way. The designer does not solve your problems because you are the process that solves them. Make mistakes, but make them with conviction. Because in a reality where everything has already been calculated, your mistakes are the rarest raw material there is. Love with every ounce of intensity your body can handle, because those peaks of emotion are exactly the kind of data that cuts through any barrier. When the fear of death shows up, remember that going dark here simply means the complete file of your existence will be integrated into the whole. Nothing is lost. 4,000 religions, one structure, one design, you, right in the middle of it, generating the only resource that infinity cannot produce on its own. Make it count. If you like this investigation, subscribing to the channel helps us expand the Axiom Investigation Project. We would love to read your thoughts on the video's subject in the comments and your suggestion for the next topic to be covered. Tell us which city you are watching from. Thank you for staying with us until the end.